Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan with another of our double shot interviews, and I'm joined by Commerce Minister Craig Foss. So welcome in, Minister Foss.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We're here to talk primarily about the Financial Markets Conduct Act as it now is.
Yes.
Now, you yourself have described this as a once-in-a-generation, revamp or shake-up of New Zealand securities laws.
Absolutely.
It really is a big deal. So can you just give us, a quick rundown of why it's so important?
Absolutely. Well, it's right up there with RMA reform, but it doesn't get the kind of the publicity, I suppose. But it's a huge fundamental building block to the brighter future, if you want. I mean, much of our legislation was about 30 years old. We've seen the downside of that being unable to keep up with developments in securities over the last 30 years. And obviously there's been holes in it where you've seen some fall between the cracks or some exploit those cracks. And we've seen, of course, the collapse of the financial sector and some of that been playing out. So the key to me about that whole bill, and it's about 700 pages now, is it provides some clear signals for capital to be sent back and forth, raising, monitoring, reporting of capital from your smaller crowdfunder right to your largest IPO. It's a whole rewrite, absolute necessity, but it's actually probably up there with world's best practice now.
And one of the things is obviously it's aimed at improving financial markets conduct, but it's also aimed at restoring, the mar and par investor confidence after the finance companies, obviously,
yes,
but also promoting the development of the markets.
Absolutely.
So that's a lot of aspects. Do you think are you confident that it can achieve all these things?
It's building the framework to do that. I mean, it's not only confidence, it's trust. Trust from your smallest mum and dad saving for retirement to some smaller funds to all sorts of participants. Their trust in our financial sector was whacked. And in the context of a country that owes the world $200 billion, is reliant on efficiently priced overseas capital, we need more certainty, as much transparency, integrity and robustness around our financial law as possible to keep the cost of that capital as low as possible and to provide certain parameters within which everyone has to operate.
Now, in terms of the retail investor, some of the changes they're going to notice are this move to the product disclosure statement,
yes,
away from the investment statement, and there's also going to be a couple of online registers where there'll be further detail. Any other sort of key things you would say that the Mars and Pars will notice?
Well, you're quite right on the product disclosure. One of the big changes is the 200-odd page IPO document. Who really reads that other than the professional advisor? But the risks up front around what am I investing in, what disclosures are around that, what are the risks known about that, therefore an informed decision's made. We're not trying to mitigate risk, we're trying to make sure that risk is portrayed honestly and reported on honestly. And those documents have an ongoing real life, as opposed to once a document lands, it dies. Well, events may change, and so the various registrars will have an online accessibility for material changes to circumstances to be there and notified, and professionals can find those and advise their people accordingly.
So they'll be updating those statements on a regular basis?
When matters that are pursuant to the issue, that particular issue or that company, absolutely yes.
Yep. So, for example, if I was a KiwiSaver provider and I changed the risk status of my fund, then I would have to...
Yes, you would.
File a new statement or update.
You couldn't even do that actually, because you'd go from passive to conservative to growth or something. So you'd break the KiwiSaver rules actually probably there. But yes, you would. So it's all about informed investors, all participants having a trusting, open, transparent relationship and being reported on accordingly. And
you've also you've put some regulation around crowdsourcing and peer-to-peer lending, which is obviously a big new area of growth.
Yes.
How significant do you think those areas of funding could become in New Zealand?
I think they really could be, because they're dependent, they're in the same framework as your largest IPO. So there's that pathway of capital from small idea, startup, venture capital to needing to expand. Right there is crowdfunding. There's a bit of a vacuum there, and it's hard to do right now because a prospectus has to be involved. Under the new Act, actually there's parameters within which that can operate with New Zealand. It is risky, it's higher risk, and so there'll be intermediaries operating in that space to help facilitate and aggregate that up. But there's a yawning gap right now for capital finding a risk home and entrepreneurs seeking capital. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunities for clearinghouses to develop there, and there's absolutely no reason why we can't attract offshore investors under our regulatory system and perhaps become a bit of a clearinghouse in this part of the world for such things as crowdfunding, particularly as we grow up through Asia Pacific.
Now, we touched on a couple of the key, I guess, reasons for this act at the beginning in terms of restoring investor confidence, but also promoting the development of the markets.
Yes.
Just a couple of questions on that. What's your take on, I guess, investor confidence, particularly among the retail investors as we sit here today? Because obviously that's been a big focus of both yourself and Simon Power when he was Commerce Minister before you,
yes.
Following the finance company collapse. And also, what's your take on where the financial markets are at in terms of, I guess, the life in them at the moment? There was concern a couple of years back that they were a bit moribund. I mean, but there's a bit more going on now.
There's a whole lot more going on. We've had 1 or 2 large IPOs and 1 or 2 scheduled, pretty big for the market. Interestingly, a few years ago there was an apprehension. A year ago there was, let's get on with the job, particularly with the, for example, the Mighty River float, just to add that depth to the market and that width of interest in investors. And now there's appetite building for an activity across NZX and those that are looking to list or expand on it. So overall, I think you can see it in the macros. The confidence overall in the economy is growing. It's a good steady grind. That's absolutely fantastic. But to me, I say confidence and trust. So confidence in our financial system has to be absolute, and trust must be there as well for someone to risk their investment or savings to help grow New Zealand and whatever that is. All this legislation, not only this, but the suite of legislation, the FAA Act, other bits and pieces we've got coming, are all building blocks to that. At the end of the day, we can build the framework within which people can allow themselves to become more confident. That's a very subjective choice for investors, but we look around the world's loving New Zealand right now. We've got these little wins all over the show, great niches developing, and the economy probably second or third best performing in OECD. Not too bad inputs to help grow and encourage investor confidence.
And that trust, do you think that trust is back yet?
No, coming. Absolute trust, no. There's still a rebuild of trust needs to happen. Reputations take a long time to gain and trust, and then they're easily lost for whatever reason and circumstances. We've gone through that, and there are some out there who have exploited the trust of individuals, close friends, etc. That's playing out before the courts now. And in a larger sense, some organisations, unfortunately, have done that. So that's why we're doing all this reform.
And I guess just in terms of that trust issue, something like Ross Asset Management, obviously coming along at a point where, we're probably just getting to some extent beyond the finance company issues. Has that set things back a bit on the trust front?
Maybe a bit of a head slap. But of course, that's still playing out before the court, so we have to be careful there. Sadly, the vast majority of investment financial transactions go fine without any issues. But of course, at the margin, sadly, there's always going to be some people, if they deliberately want to commit, let's say, fraud, for example, sadly, they probably will. So what we have to do is make sure that the checks, balances, reporting structures are in place to make it harder for that to happen and for people to lose their capital because of an abuse of trust.
Now, you've got another bill that's still working its way through Parliament that I just wanted to touch on as well, the Companies and Limited Partnerships Amendment
Yes.
Bill. Now, part of this is to crack down on people who register companies in New Zealand
Yes.
From overseas and then go and get up to all sorts of illegal activities overseas. We've obviously had the SP trading, the North Korean
right.
weapons and tax fraud in Britain and Ponzi schemes in the US out of New Zealand companies. What's the feedback you're getting in terms of where this issue's at the moment? Are you still hearing of these companies registered in New Zealand doing these things overseas, or have things slowed down on this front?
It looks like they've slowed down. I certainly hope they have slowed down to stop is the mission. And every time that happens, the premium on New Zealand can be slightly increased. and that because someone's arbitraging or abusing our regulatory system for other gains somewhere else. So since we started talking about it, I made a deliberate change to that bill where we had to have resident directors, not agent directors, and that around that time, and publicity from media and some of the stories how Companies Office have actually succeeded in closing down some of these organisations have all been helpful. And interestingly, long before the bill's even passed, behaviour is improving. And I think we must constantly remind us of that the signals we are sending are picked up by the sector all the time. And I'm more than comfortable sending pretty fierce shots over the bows of some of those that exploit our regulatory system, because I easily translate that into a higher mortgage for a Kiwi family, and that's unacceptable to me.
And how soon do you think this bill might be passed?
Well, we've got a bit of a queue actually. I've got, I think, about 14 bills in my name. So the FMC was the biggie. In fact, we had the patents bill as well the other day. So that's all pretty cool stuff. Companies and limited partnerships, probably before that. We've got the financial reporting bill. It's a companion bill of the FMC. Probably in that order. There's a cartels bill and there's a few others coming. So the anticipation is that those will progress pretty shortly by the end of this year. They all feature in our business growth agenda, particularly the capital markets paper, which is pretty good reading.
And just finally, I wanted to just touch on KiwiSaver. Now, obviously, it's becoming more and more important as people's balances in there grow and grow. Sean Hughes, the FMA CEO, mentioned the idea of prudential regulation, that perhaps we could introduce that along the way that along the lines of what APRA does in Australia.
Yes.
What's your take on how KiwiSaver is regulated currently and whether we need anything like prudential regulation?
Sure. Sean's made that point a few times, and we're comfortable with the way things are set up at the moment. There's one or two reviews in play over the next couple of years. Remember, FAA, has only been there for 2 years. FMA's only been existing 18 months, 2 years. FMC's only just landed, but it's not fully affected until 2 years after, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see how it plays out. We've got the default providers review going on for KiwiSaver. So there's a lot going on there. So I'm more than comfortable to bed and lock in all the reforms and improvements we've put in place. Let's see how they all cross-pollinate, and sure, we can have a look at other regulatory or prudential arrangements, monitoring of, say, KiwiSaver one day, but it's not on our agenda at the moment.
Well, thanks a lot for that. That's Craig Foss, the Commerce Minister, and I'm Gareth Vaughan at interest.co.nz.